Hey everybody, Domenic Neshi here from Wealthy here with Tiffy.
Hi, how are you?
And the great Nigel Cumberland from Silk Road Partnerships. Now, a short story about Nigel. I got a book handed over to me for Christmas, and it was 100 things successful people should do. I don't know if this person was trying to tell me something and implying something, but I did read that book. I was absolutely enthralled by the information that came through. And right at the back of the book, it said Nigel had written, please contact me with some feedback. And what we did is reached out and said, hey, Nigel, would you mind jumping on the show? And he absolutely said yes, but he said, go read all my other books in advance. So we went over and read a couple of the other books. And Nigel, thank you very much for jumping on the show.
Not at all. It's great to be here. And I'm happy to share some of my experiences and words of wisdom to hopefully help as many of the listeners as possible on their own journeys.
Well, it sounds like you have a wealth of experience. I've done a little bit of research, but I suppose you'd know your story better than mine. Would you like to just give us a little bit of an overview on, your journey from basically seeing your executive working in some place, exiting a business, and writing a bucket load of books?
Yeah. So I'm at the half century, so it's 30 years since university or thereabouts. So it was the first third of that corporate career. I was in finance, the finance director eventually with UK multinationals, for example, in Hong Kong, China. I wanted a break for different reasons and ended up in Hong Kong, setting up a recruitment company, which I eventually sold to Hayes, the UK listed firm, in 2006. And then since then, I began coaching. Yeah, I began coaching and mentoring people by request. It kind of fell into it. I thought, this is a cool business. And I, at the same time, began writing, really taking off with the writing in the last 5 years, which is really enjoyable because I get royalty revenue. It helps me market. I can sort of not need to be training and coaching leaders and teams all the time. I can be a little bit selective. I can have breathing spaces. And through the writing, I've done a lot of speaking, conferences, events. And I'm astonished by the stories I'm hearing and the patterns which have gone into my recent books. 100 Things Successful Leaders Do, 100 Things Millionaires Do, and the one you mentioned, 100 Things Successful People Do. So it's people, millionaires, and leaders, a kind of trilogy, you might say. And the feedback's really good. So I'm happy to share some more today with you.
Well, can we just start with first 100 Things Successful People Do? What I found profound, or what I really enjoyed about your book is I found going through the book, it points to so many pieces of literature that I've sort of stumbled across in my sort of self-development journey. And you've managed to sort of compile all those key learnings into a number of 100 chapters that you can kind of dip into, for a source of inspiration or a reminder or a new key habit that you can sort of use in your daily life. Was that sort of the intention of it, or how do you sort of suggest that people jump into these books and use it?
Well, your summary there is very good. Let me just talk about the history of it and then talk about how people can use the book. As I coached many leaders in the last sort of 15 years and their teams with multinationals and governments and SMEs, I began to take a note of the smaller things that people were or weren't doing. I might be there helping a leader, for example, focused on gravitas and delegation, but then I'd realized maybe they weren't sleeping enough, or they were having issues at home that they were carrying to work, or they weren't eating well enough, or they weren't forgiving a past colleague for some wrongs they'd done. And I realized these smaller things, as I begin to list them, they're actually really important to share back to people. I had my own as well for my own life. So actually arriving at 100 may sound like a lot, but wasn't that difficult. And how people can read it, yeah, you're right. Just dip into it, skim read it. I have people who read it from 1 to 100 and then write to me. Others kind of dip into it. Others mark pages and send me photographs of which of the 2-page chapters were most impactful, even asking me questions.
Okay. And Tiffy, have you got anything that you wanted to tip in there? I see you nodding and smiling the whole time that I'm chatting here.
I want to read it first and foremost. And I can relate to a lot of what I'm hearing without having read the book. I come from the corporate world and I've had good and bad bosses. I've had times where I've been in a better place than others, and it's how the things that he was mentioning, like so sometimes you need to be in a good space yourself to be able to project that into your team, and I could 100% understand how this can help anyone really.
I really like that because it's a holistic approach about being, well-being and getting the most out of, your everyday experience. Now, I'd like to just jump over quickly to 100 Things Millionaires Do, because this podcast really is about building wealth. And what I really liked about 100 Things Millionaires Do is there was some surprising things in there. It was some nods to things that you shouldn't do, or things that millionaires you notice didn't do that was as important as things that they did do. Can you talk to some of those things there that things to keep away from if you want to be a millionaire?
Good point, by the way. And I got to just say that a lot of things in the book are mindset related. There's some things which, as you can see, are kind of investment related. But I leave the bulk of the depth of the investment advice to investment experts. But when it comes back to kind of being successful, there are all kinds of things that people shouldn't do or fail to do. For example, many don't have a plan. They don't know why they want to be wealthy, don't know how wealthy they want to be. They're with the wrong people who perhaps are bringing them down, don't believe in them, make fun. There's a procrastination. There's a sort of, I think one of the chapters I titled it, What Are You Waiting For?
Yes.
Very common when I coach entrepreneurs who are perhaps, they've already started on the journey, but then they're delaying the expansion, the bringing in a partner, the growing part. Rolling up your sleeves. It's surprising how we talk about, it's going to be hard work, but often without a reminder from a coach or mentor, an entrepreneur or someone working in the corporate world can just forget perhaps all the ways in which they could be persistent and spend more time.
Were there any key takeaways when you finished the 100 things that millionaires should do? I mean, it's 100, smaller chapters, but it feels like there were a few common takeaways. Like there that you alluded to a few. One is your why, so having a very clear driving force to help you get up in the morning and to do that.
Exactly. Yeah. And you're right. There's the why.
Yep.
Well, there's also the how, and it sounds easy to sort of give people advice, say on property investments or investing in funds or maximizing your salary and remuneration. But when you're looking to grow, not everyone has that clarity of how they're going to build up their wealth, and also the with whom, in what form, and then it's allowing changes to happen. For example, are you ready to take on more responsibility? Are you ready to start, as you invest in certain areas, really keeping an eye on them, checking in? So it's changing behaviors that some people don't do so well.
May I ask
there are some common things. Yeah, go on.
May I ask you about the who there? Because when I did jump into that chapter, it was funny to read basically a wealth creation book or a book about millionaires and hearing about more or less the social side of things. And, are you a proponent for, your net worth is your network, or, the 5 people that you hang around with most will have a great impact on how you live your life and then therefore, change your mindset and so on and so forth?
Well, first of all, everyone's unique. So I'm almost saying, yes, you could be a horrible, aggressive leader or entrepreneur, and you could be very successful financially. However, on average, to be successful, you need to have people to want to be working with you, investing in you, supporting you. You want to have the relationship managers in the bank actually liking you, valuing you, finding you open, finding you honest, seeing integrity, trusting you. So yes, you are the 5 people around you. It's slightly simplistic, that concept, but it has truth to it. That seriously, if you want to change your ambitions, if you want to push yourself, then you really need to be with people who are not, at least not doing the opposite, pulling you down, not believing in you, draining your energy, whether we call them toxic people or whatever. And maybe they're great people. It's just for what you're wanting to achieve, it might be wrong to spend lots of time with them, which is why I also noticed, I've had the same experience myself, is business partnerships. Not easy to find the ideal partners. I have one now in the Silk Road Partnership, or a couple, I should say. In the past, I've struggled. And I think it's really about trial and error. And at the same time as working out who am I working with to become more successful, it's also about how am I as well. And how am I changing and developing?
That's a trending topic. So we've done a podcast recently where it was the how. It's a lot of people have a why, and then they struggle to put it into action in that every day, and how they start going for that. I like that there's also the whom in this particular topic. Can I ask, you're now a coach, right? And
yes,
is that your intention, that you also help with the whom?
Often I do. I do things like relationship or stakeholder mapping. Who do you know? Why do you know them? How are they helpful for your future? I'm not saying stop connecting with people with whom you're just friendly, but think about where do you need to invest more time in a give and take relationship to help either your career, your business, or your investments. But can I also add, in addition to the whom and the what and the how, there's also the when and the where. And there's a question of timing. I don't just mean when we enter and leave markets, etc. The kind of classic investment timing of property and share markets, etc., etc. So when are you ready? When are you ready? And there's a cliche of we're never ready, so act now. But there's also a counterbalance to that of, well, what do I do now? What do I do later? And then of course the where, which is often dictated by who we are, where we live, what we know. But perhaps there needs to be a little bit of research and broadening and looking beyond perhaps what seems obvious. Because I think there's always a danger of staying in our comfort zones.
Yeah, that's fascinating. As you were talking, it was reminding me of a few things. So when you're with different people, I think it expands your mindset as to what's actually available, and it helps release or get rid of some of those limiting beliefs. Because if you are in a specific demographic circle, or you hang around the same type of people that are all doing the same things that you're doing, you can get trapped by a certain level of thinking. So for instance, I'm sitting across from Tiffy today, and normally someone would say you can't invest in real estate if you don't have any money, but if you remove that limiting belief that you don't actually need money to invest in real estate, Tiffy's gone out and found great opportunities where if you have a really good investment opportunity, you'll find money. Someone will come along for the ride. It may mean that you don't have 100% ownership or 100% ownership of the property or the business or the idea. But if you've got the limiting belief that I need this in order to proceed, or I need to live in that country, or I need to have so much money, then you're kind of going to be trapped by that thought. By hanging out with people like Tiffy or yourself, or going to different groups, it really does, I think, broaden your mind to what's actually available to you, and which is so much more that's
agreed.
there.
Totally agreed. And I'm happy to hear that story about Tiffany has success. And it really is about exploring and doing and newness. And so, being open. But it's also about owning what are your beliefs, and maybe some of them you don't want to change. It's like I've got friends and family who don't want to leave where they were brought up, or are happy to stay in the same sector or job for most or all of their career. And it's just owning that. And it's saying, okay, that's may not be a limitation, but it certainly limits in some way. But let me work around that. Let me work with that. But you're right. Well, a lot of my work as a coach, helping managers, leaders, entrepreneurs, is to help them look at their beliefs, their behaviors, their values, what's driving them, who's driving them, and question that and say, is that really you? Maybe there are some obligations you have. You've got to fund your parents, or you have to be involved in the family business. So let's accept that and maybe make sure it's as clear as it can be. And then let's just work with that to help you then on your path to success.
So let me just point to another topic that I loved when I came across it. And you talk about luck and more or less engineering your own luck. And you had a story where you said, you were lucky to have met David Beckham and to hung out with the Real Madrid team. But in fact, you had a technique. There was method to your madness into putting yourself in a position to be lucky. Are you happy to share that story?
I will. It was about 2003. Real Madrid were visiting Hong Kong as part of an Asia tour, and David Beckham had just joined Los Galacticos, as they were called at the time. And I was really keen to be involved and connect with them. And I speak reasonable Spanish. And I was living and working in Hong Kong at the time. And I contacted the Hong Kong Football Association, offering to be a translator just for the few days they'd be in town. And they accepted. And I was given open access to be with the team. I was given a hotel room in the Hyatt where they were staying. I had access to the dugout. And the irony was, I rarely had to translate in Spanish. I remember once when David was speaking, I had to help someone understand what he was saying in English, which I think we all laughed about. But I rarely had to speak Spanish, except once when they were playing a game. But so yeah, it seems like fantastic luck. But I had the nerve or courage to sort of and to find out who I need to call or speak to in the Hong Kong Football Association. And lo and behold, they said yes.
That's awesome.
So there you are.
I love that. I like putting yourself in a position to be lucky. Unless you put the application in, you wouldn't have been lucky enough to go and have that. Now, I want to sort of pivot a little bit away and ask you a couple little questions, a little bit more, I won't say esoteric, but then also some tactical ones. The first question I want to ask you here is, how would you define someone as being financially wealthy? What's your sort of definition of someone that's wealthy?
Good question. And that's a question actually that I was actually asked recently by someone else I met who was reading my book. I think it's to do with how you feel. It's how comfortable you are. It's about, have you got less worry moving forward? Can you kind of tell that you can pay off things, that you're not having to worry about? You've got to find the income for the future to pay for property, education, kids, pension, retirement, etc. So sure, you may be wealthy and the income hasn't come yet, but you're feeling wealthy because you have some nice passive or recurring income foreseen. So it really does vary. And I cannot give you a dollar figure, because if we're in different parts of the world, and at the moment I'm in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, where people can feel extremely wealthy with an amount of money, which is probably far less than in Sydney or London. You'd kind of feel, yeah, that's enough for me to feel comfortable.
And you said something there that I picked up, because we're massive proponents for it, but the word passive. Having passive income.
Exactly. It's rather like my royalties for my books, or I'm also doing LinkedIn learning training courses, which will also produce royalties. And some of the, I think they're amazing, aren't they, if you can have them, and also from investments. They are wonderful things to have. And I think they can be a link of semi-passive and semi-recurring as well. So I have some clients with whom I do training, and it's reasonably recurring. So my effort is required, though. So I wouldn't call it passive, but there's a certain, I know it's going to come kind of thing.
Yeah,
so,
that makes
there's
sense.
Pure passive and semi-passive, yeah.
And also, sorry, just to comment on that, sometimes people will say, but like that required a lot of effort in the setup. Like writing a book required effort for you to get paid royalties when you're setting up your system with properties. The first couple of months, if you have to deal with a renovation, it won't be passive, but once everything is set up, that's when the passive income starts, right? And I believe that the more creative, the better, and the more sources, which I'm guessing now you're getting more and more sources of passive income.
Yeah, no, Tiffany, you're quite right. My wife and I, in the past, have renovated properties here in Kuala Lumpur, and we might have spent a year working with the building firm to renovate, or sometimes to rebuild, and writing a book. It's at least 6 months of writing every day in my available time, and it's often planning them for much longer. So there is that time involved, but that's the there's still the time involved also in getting your head around. So what do I want to write books? Do I want to renovate property? So it's all about, investing the time and effort and trial and error, and not giving up at the first hurdle or the first book. I mean, the first book I wrote didn't sell for a couple of thousand copies. I mean, but if I decided to judge my quality as an author on my first book sales, I should have given up. But no, I felt it's a passion. I can do it well, and I've got other topics. And that first book was way back now in the early 2000s. So it's a little bit about basing your time you invest on, well, what interests you? Where do you think you'll comfortably put in more effort? Go the extra mile, read the extra report. My wife loves to check renovated properties and check for cracks and changes and mistakes and things. And if she didn't have that ability, then perhaps we wouldn't have been so successful in renovating properties.
So she has a body of knowledge. You've invested in the time, the learning, but also having a small passion for it that's going to help you get through the 6 months of working your ass off and finding the time, as you said. May I ask you, what piece or top piece of advice would you give to, I've got a couple age groups, because I feel like every age group has a different sort of strategy, but I could be wrong. For someone that's in that sort of 20 to 30 age group, if they want to be wealthy or to build a financially wealthy life?
It is chapter 13 of my 100 Things Millionaires Do. The title is Stop Leaking Money.
Yes.
Really make sure the salary you're earning, which probably isn't that much, unless you're a really successful investment banker or on the tech world, where you should be watching every dollar or pound you're spending, and just make sure you don't have any useless subscriptions. Just make sure you're not going mad buying fancy lattes every day, repeatedly. Just to sort of make sure you can put enough aside, and you're getting into that habit of not spending everything you're earning on little weekend breaks and holidays, as many young people do. And I don't blame them. I don't deny them that. But maybe find a balance.
I love that. I really love that, because I have younger siblings and lots of younger friends, and I feel that they want things today, and they feel like the amount that they're saving is meager. And in some instances, it's true. It is a meager amount that you are saving, but I think that the habit, the discipline is going to pay dividends once you've saved, the $1,000 or $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 over the couple of years that you're sort of grinding away. Because later on, if you've got those disciplines, it's much, much easier for you.
Yeah, if you've been spending the last 10 years partying hard, even if you settle down and have a family, then you'll party in some other way, right?
No, I agree. And I wonder whether people in their 20s, give or take, their parents have been quite successful, and perhaps I can't blame them. Perhaps they see life being a bit easier. Let me enjoy life. Whereas perhaps early generations, I think even myself in my 20s, probably thought like, let me work hard for the future. Perhaps I didn't enjoy my 20s as much as they do now. So it's all about.
And how would you defer this answer? So what advice would you give someone if now you're talking in the 30 to 40-year-old age bracket?
I haven't got a simple one there. It's more of a combination. I think it's by that age, make sure you know yourself. So really kind of get a sense for what your strengths are. Where can you add value, create value? Do you have the confidence of investing in a few buy-to-lets in your city? Do you have the interest? Do you think you've got the time to kind of manage that process? If you're in a certain career and you're staying in that career to want to grow, are you kind of investing time and effort to make sure you have the right relationships and the right skills and your, stuff like gravitas and looking to grow your career? And are you comfortable with whom you're relying? Because by your 30s and 40s, hopefully you become quite a good judge of people. Who should you be dropping? Who's toxic? Who's not helping you? Have you got an investment advisor who's all talk, and you're realizing actually I shouldn't just rely on that one. I should be talking to a few others, even at my bank or whatever. Or should I be going online now and doing some trading, not relying upon the local stockbroker with the high fees? So, yeah, I think it's using the fact you've lived through your 20s and 30s and somehow going a bit deeper with your choices and decisions. And hopefully by your 40s, you've established where you wish to be successful in terms of your life and financially. Are you in the right career? Are you beginning to think about what assets, what things you'd like to acquire and create? And I guess it's an ongoing journey, but still, if you miss an opportunity, you risk reaching your 50s and worrying about your future, feeling you haven't got enough to be able to comfortably live on in later life.
So it sounds like you need to be a lot more tactical. You need to be very self-aware. And that's when you've got to really nail in and do the work or do the hard work and kind of take a good, deep, hard look at yourself and the people around you and say, well, have the habits and things that I've done to date served me well? And, if I keep on doing the same things I've always done, I'm going to keep on getting what I've got. So I need to change something and fast because we're running out of time. Now, may I ask you about this upcoming book of yours? I don't know if it's out yet, but The 100 Things Successful Leaders Do, is that out? Where can we find it? Can you tell us a little bit about it?
That's coming out in June in the UK and I believe at the same time in Australia and around the world in the English language market.
Mm.
It complements 100 things millionaires do and 100 things successful people do, but isn't the same content. There's the occasional overlap. For example, emotional intelligence is important to all of us. But the leaders one is based on the fact that a lot of the time I'm coaching leaders, different job titles, but they're in leadership positions, sometimes very senior, sometimes mid-level. And I wanted to go beyond the obvious skills of delegating well and having a vision, to some of the smaller stuff. Stuff like mastering office politics, interviewing like a professional, projecting positivity, letting other people lead and have the limelight, empowering your team, getting your hands dirty. So it's in the same kind of style as the other books, but aimed specifically at managers and leaders today and people going into leadership roles.
That's interesting.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And so, of course, there's going to be 100 chapters again. Is there one...
The same thing. Go on.
Is there one that you... it's your big takeaway and it's not the obvious suggestions that you would give anyone in that those... I agree with the small little details and how the everyday little details will make the best leaders. Is there something non-obvious that you would want to mention right now?
Oh, not obvious. I'm looking at the list of chapters now and thinking, what is not obvious? And there's a few, but you're asking for one.
The one that you want to leave today with our audience.
There's a few which link. I think walking your talk and being the real you, being authentic.
Yes.
Finding out who you really are and stop being aggressive because that's how your boss was in the past or how you think you have to be. Stop micromanaging because you love details and you're a bit nerdy. It's about just doing the right thing and aligning it with who you are. What's your style? If you're an introvert, maybe you can't be that fast-spoken extrovert style of leader. You have to just be comfortable in you're slower and more reflective, and you will speak less in discussions. So work with that, and get your ego out of the way. Try and seek meaning. Sure, you want to be promoted, you want to be visible, you want to be successful, but at the same time, if you're leading other people, ensure that they shine, and also as you work towards the bottom line, remember the bigger picture. This whole issue of purpose and social value and sustainability. Be interested in all that. So yes, you'll be achieving your team sales targets or finance targets or whatever business targets, but be really open to the bigger picture, because I think it's becoming such a big thing now that we're all realizing that's how we have to be as organizations and leaders.
I couldn't agree more. Now, I think it might clash with some big corporations, what you're suggesting. So the whole be authentic, be yourself, and not care too much about the targets, which I can relate to. I told my boss once, I honestly don't wake up to to get a better gross margin every day. Like, that's not my big goal. And she's like, but that's one of your targets. It's like, yeah, but I don't care. I was like, and there was a clash. And I couldn't agree more. And that's how I think you can relate to others and others can look up to you. But how do you handle like that with organizations that don't necessarily agree with?
Well, it's going to start with some of the leaders in there, right?
Well, I mean, that's where you need to decide: do you stay or do you leave, or do you hang in there and think about: am I getting other things? Am I being motivated? Am I working with great people? But at some point, a really astute leader that's really aware of themselves. And it sounds like the three of us really are open to self-help and development. So we're aware of ourselves. We would not stay in a working environment or culture where the direction doesn't flow with us. And you read a lot of stories now. We read stories, don't we, about people who are leaving the corporate world for these different... I'm reading a moment. There's the latest Monocle magazine. Someone who became a beekeeper, being in business, became a beekeeper. Someone else was in business, has a small hotel somewhere in the world. And I think we're seeing more and more of those stories because we're almost... Yeah.
I did mention this in a previous podcast. I have a Facebook group called Career Change Support for Millennials. And that's led through me wanting to change my career for a long while. And that's what I've done in the last year. And agree. And that's why a lot of people who come from the corporate world end up leaving because they cannot bring the whole selves to work, and they're not inspired by people around them. And if you want to be authentic and you are starting to think what you want to do with your life, where you want to go, what's your why, that's where you start considering, okay, I need a change of career.
Sounds like we've got to do a bit of reflection, and it's all this literature that really helps us bring it all and help us synthesize it, find out what our true north is and what do we want to do with our life. Which, let me ask you this next question, Nigel. Aside from obviously your own books, what would you say is part of your holy grail of reading, or what's one book that you've handed over to your friends and you said this is a book that you must read?
The one that comes to mind isn't an obvious business leadership book. It's the Brazilian writer Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist.
Alchemist, yes.
The journey of finding yourself.
Yes.
And I really am into these simpler ones, like Jonathan Livingston Seagull by Richard Bach, which came out in the 70s, one of the older versions out of print now. These stories of a journey and of finding yourself. And I think that's the story of humanity. And we do most of that in the business world, because that's where we spend most of our awake hours earning a living. And now we're talking a lot about this true north, finding yourself, and it isn't easy for businesses because people maybe are speaking up about, I don't like this, I want more of this, and it can be frustrating to a leader when a young millennial expresses their opinions. But it's better they're honest. It's better we allow the honesty and openness and try and work with it.
Absolutely. And I couldn't agree more. I absolutely love that book. I kind of dip into it every now and then. And with like all good books, you pick it up, you have a read, and like, oh, that was interesting. I didn't see that last time. There's like a chapter that resonates for what you're doing and your point in your life, what's current now, what's happening to you. Nigel, I know that you're a busy man. We don't want to take up too much more of your time. So I want to say thank you very much for jumping on the podcast. You've written some brilliant books. I can't tell you now, if I hand your book to someone else, they're going to see 50 or 60 different dog ears in there. So.
No, thank you. Thank you. It's been a pleasure. And my email address is on the last page of all of my books. I do invite people to find me on social media. And it's so wonderful to get feedback from readers who share their stories and link it to one or two of my chapters and sometimes ask me questions. So it becomes more of a real kind of thing than just writing a book that I never know who's reading.
That's amazing. Being able, it's a two-way street, right? So you're getting feedback. That's amazing. Congrats on your books.
Well, if you ever come to Australia, we welcome you on the podcast again.
I am there quite often. So when I'm in Sydney, I'll let you know. I'll forewarn you both.
Oh, great. Fantastic.
And we will do a face-to-face.
We absolutely will. Thank you very much, Nigel, and we'll see you soon.